My best friend cheated on her fiancé during her bachelorette party. But when I told her that she needed to admit what she did, she threatened to expose my past to my new boyfriend. It was my best friend Emma's bachelorette party. I was so happy for her since she was getting married to her high school sweetheart, David, who was my brother. I was her maid of honor. But during the bachelorette party, she hired male dancers, and that was something I could not forgive. She slept with every single dancer that she hired. When I confronted her about it, she told me that if I told David, she would tell my boyfriend about me being an adult entertainer in my past. I felt conflicted because this was my brother and my best friend. On one hand, I felt guilty telling David because I knew it would break his heart. On the other hand, I couldn't let my best friend get away with this. It didn't feel right. When we got back from the holiday trip away, David asked us how the trip went. I looked over at Emma. She had not an ounce of guilt on her face. Emma smiled and said it was very relaxing. She talked about all the fun she had and said that she really needed that time. David told her he was glad that she enjoyed herself and seemed eager to hear all about the trip. The next week, Emma and I talked about the wedding decorations and seating arrangements. Emma asked me a question, but I didn't hear a word she said. The flash of men going to her room replayed in my mind. The guilt was eating me alive. She broke me out of my trance suddenly. "Emily, are you even listening to me?" she asked. I said yes and apologized. We chose the colors for the wedding decorations and left the shop. I decided to tell David about the nights on the trip, but I had no proof. These were heavy accusations without any evidence. But I couldn't let my brother sit there and marry such a manipulative person. The next day, I invited Emma out to brunch at this new restaurant near my house. I put my phone on the edge of the table facing Emma and had a regular girls' chat like we always have. We hadn't spoken one-on-one about the nights of the trip since the night she threatened to tell John about my past. We talked about the wedding plans, and she told me how excited she was about everything. Then I brought up the trip and asked her if she wanted to go somewhere like that for her and David's honeymoon. She said she would love that since it was such a beautiful resort and the food was amazing. I told her that one of the other bridesmaids got the number of a guy she met at the resort. She said that was juicy and told me to spill the tea about it. I said I didn't know much, except they planned on having a date soon and joked that she might be getting proposed to at Emma's wedding. Emma laughed and said she wished she could have taken one of the guy's phone numbers from the resort. I asked her which one. She told me in a low voice I'd take the second guy. He was so good in bed. I acted like I was picking up my drink and pushed my phone closer to her. I asked if he was the best out of all of them, and she said, by a long shot. We laughed and drank. Soon, the waiter brought us the bill, and I ended my voice recording on my phone. We hugged and went our separate ways. The second I got to my car, I called my brother. I told him that I needed to talk to him ASAP and asked to meet up with him without telling Emma. He asked me if everything was okay and what was going on. I told him that I would explain as soon as I saw him. I told him to meet me at my house and hung up the phone. I raced home and waited for David. When he knocked on the door, I answered it quickly and asked if Emma knew he was over there. He said no and that she thinks he went to visit our parents. I led him to the couch and pulled out my phone. I told him I wanted him to hear something and played the audio. His face dropped. He asked me how long I'd known, and I said since that night. We sat there in a long silence and he said, she told me she had a lot of fun and how she really needed that night. She talked about how all the guys at the resort were hitting on her, and she flashed the ring I bought her every time. I couldn't believe she lied to me. I told him I was sorry he had to find out that way, but he just had to know the actual person he was marrying. He asked why I waited so long to tell him, and I told him that she threatened to tell John that I used to be an adult entertainer. David said that it shouldn't matter since it happened before we were together, but John was a conservative man, and I wanted to be 100% transparent with him at the right time. Also, I wanted John to hear it from me. David told me he was sorry that I got caught in the crossfire of their relationship, but he was my brother, and I cared more about his well-being than keeping a friendship with a liar. I then told him that if he were going to break up with Emma, he would have to do it for another reason. I didn't want Emma to know I told him or recorded our conversation because she could still tell John about my past. It was 2 weeks before the wedding, and I got a call from Emma. She was crying and screaming on the phone. I could barely understand what she was saying other than her repeating, "He left me. He left me." I asked her what she was talking about, and she said David called off the wedding. I asked her why, and she said that they weren't compatible because he found some evidence of her cheating on her phone. I could hear her sniffing up the tears. I asked for more information, and she said that was all he had said. She asked me if there was another girl, and I told her I knew nothing about another girl. I said he was head over heels for Emma, and I didn't know what could have happened. Her voice sounded so hurt. For a moment, I felt bad for her. I knew I would have to be there for her at this time. A few months went by, and Emma stayed at my house, constantly rotting on my couch and crying to herself. I tried to cheer her up with her favorite candies and watched movies with her. But you don't realize how many movies are centered around couples until you have to avoid them. I was there for her through all the heartache and listened to her vent. She asked me if I could talk to David to get him to take her back. And I told her that she had broken his heart and that I didn't think there was a way to come back from that. She cried day in and day out. After a while, she started crying less. She asked me how John and I were such a good couple and how he felt knowing about my past. I told her he still didn't know yet and that I wanted to tell him on my own terms. She said she didn't want what happened to her to happen to me and that I should tell him soon. I said it was my relationship and I would handle it my way. After third-wheeling our relationship for months, Emma moved back into her own apartment. She still visited a couple of times a week. She seemed happier each time I saw her, and I could see that having some space was really helping her. I was glad at this. One evening, while at dinner, John told me he was glad to see Emma doing better and asked about David. I told him that David was managing, but I realized I hadn't talked to him in a while and said I would call him up the next day to see him. At the end of dinner, the waiter brought me a dessert, but I didn't order one. When I tried to explain that I didn't order a dessert, I saw, written in chocolate sauce, "Will you marry me?" When I looked back at John, he was already on one knee, looking at me with charming eyes and a smile on his face. I nearly fainted. I felt butterflies in my stomach and shook my head yes. He put the ring on my finger and kissed me. I hugged him with tears in my eyes. The next day, I called my brother David and decided to meet him at his house to catch up. We talked about what was going on in our lives, and he was super excited to hear that John was now my fiancé. He told me that I was lucky to find someone so genuine and loving, unlike his ex. I laughed and agreed. I told him that he dodged a bullet, and if it wasn't for me, he would be stuck with a liar. He said that his big sister always looked out for him, and he was grateful for that. He said I was a genius for recording her while I was at the restaurant with her, and he probably would have been blinded by love if he hadn't heard it from the horse's mouth. We went out to eat and talked more about our lives, and I was glad to see he was doing okay. Over the next few months, John and I were arranging our wedding. At first, I was hesitant to ask Emma if she wanted to help because her wedding had been canceled, but I thought I had to since I was her best friend. She excitedly screamed yes when I asked her. I was glad that she was still down. We began looking for wedding decorations, a venue, and a cake. This was more exciting when it was your own wedding. I often daydreamed about me and John getting married, and it was coming faster than I expected. Emma and I went out for lunch one Saturday to the same restaurant we had gone to before. She said the food was so good she had to get it again. When I arrived, she got me a gift. It was a cartoon drawing of me and John. It was one of those drawings you get from the fair when you sit down and the artist sketches you and your significant other with exaggerated features like big heads and small bodies. The drawing of me had a huge mouth. I had to laugh. I asked her where she got this from since the fair hadn't been there for months, and she said she knew a guy who sells them. They look so accurate, right? She laughed. I told her, most definitely. She said we had to frame it and hang it right on top of the bed once we got married. I laughed and said, this will go somewhere, but I'm not sure exactly where yet. We both ordered the same meal we got last time, which was the grilled steak with garlic butter and the seafood paella. It was just as delicious as it was the last time. Emma asked if I was nervous about the wedding, and I told her I was, just a bit, because I hadn't told John about my past and hoped that it wouldn't make that big of a difference. She said it shouldn't if he really loved me for me. I agreed with her and we enjoyed the rest of our food and left. The wedding day arrived, and it was time for me to walk down the aisle. The soft music was playing, and I made Emma my maid of honor just as she had made me hers. I was greeted with the smiling faces of our family and friends. I felt nervous but happy. As the officiant was about to let us tell our vows, he asked if anyone objected. A voice from behind me said, me. I thought it was a joke at first, so I laughed. Then I turned around to see it was Emma. She said with a stern face, I'm serious. The crowd gasped, and I asked her what she was doing. She said that she knew I was the one who broke up her and David's wedding. I stood in shock. She said she overheard me and David's conversation at his house months ago, confessing that I recorded our conversation in the restaurant. I asked her what she was talking about, still denying the accusations. I felt my face turning red, and sweat was forming under my arms. She said she bugged David's house after the wedding because she wanted to see if there was another girl she had to worry about. But the only girl I had to worry about was you. My best friend, she screamed. She looked over at John, who now looked at me in disgust. She said not only had she told John about my past, but she also claimed she had been intimate with him for the past year. She said this was their plan all along and that they would be together now. She ran over to grab John, kissed him in front of everyone, and said, if anyone is getting married today, it's going to be me. The crowd gasped again, and there was a lot of commotion. I ran out crying. I just wanted to be alone at that point. David ran after me to console me in the dressing room. He hugged me as I cried into his arms. How could she? I said to him. He kept saying that it was going to be okay.